welcome back to the AusCannaPodcast. I'm your host, Christina McMullen, and today we're on the road as I travel to Southeast Queensland to step inside the heart of one of Australia's original medical cannabis producers, Medcan Australia. After an incredible behind-the-scenes tour of their cultivation and manufacturing facilities, yes, we're talking grow rooms, 3-tiered racks packed with colognes, and all that sparkly, sticky good stuff, I sat down with Medcan's co-founder and chief commercial officer, Gareth Ball. In this episode, we go deep on how Medcan went from a vision to a reality, the art and science of pheno-hunting, and what it really takes to get a cannabis product from plant to patient. Gareth opens up about the Canadian versus Aussie markets and what's holding our industry back, and why supporting Australian-grown cannabis needs to be a national priority. We also talk about education gaps, research barriers, and the hope that cannabis might one day be seen as a first option and not a last resort. And of course, we touch on Medcan's newest homegrown release, Velvet Thunder. Before we get into all of that though, you know the drill. We're kicking things off with a rapid fire round to get to know Gareth a little better. If you ever want to be a part of the rapid fire question round, you can shoot me an email at AusCannaReviews@gmail.com. If your question gets picked, you'll receive a fabulous AusCanna goodie pack. And on the topic of goodies, you can now support the podcast by visiting buymeacoffee.com/AusCannaPodcast. There, you will find my limited edition cargo can made in collaboration with Planetary Designs. It's the perfect stash jar for when you're on the go. And did I mention the bottom is magnetic? All right, pack your vapes, settle in, and let's get into it. All right. Are you ready?
Yes.
First question. Coffee or tea to start the day?
Coffee.
What's one thing you always travel with?
A phone charger.
What's your secret superpower no one notices?
I reckon I could read people's minds.
Ooh, what am I thinking right now?
What's my next question?
Pretty close. What's the most underrated aspect of growing cannabis in your opinion?
Probably post-harvest production is a really important part of the overall process that can be neglected somewhat in that process, and you can grow really good cannabis, but if you don't process it correctly out the other end, it can really have an impact on the product that comes out.
If emotions were an animal, what would anxiety look like?
I reckon it'd look like a scared dog. Tail between the legs type, like that, afraid.
A type of particular breed?
I'd probably say like a border collie, because they're like a little bit on edge all the time, and I have one, so I know how she's a little bit anxious.
That's an accurate description. I have a border collie cross at home too, and she is a bit
Yeah. Whereas my golden, he's completely different. There's no anxiety in that dog. He's just a lover.
What's one book or podcast you always recommend?
I like Joe Rogan podcast because the stuff that he talks about is so diverse, and the types of people that he has on there can be really, they're challenging the norms, and I like that type of stuff. I'm also a motor racing fan guy, so I like some podcasts around some of the racing side of things as well, which is enjoyable.
Okay. What memory do you revisit the most and why?
I emigrated out to Australia back in the mid-80s, and I do reflect on that quite a bit because I came from Northern Ireland, which was a bit of a troubled place around that period of time, and I reflect on how lucky I was to come to Australia and have the opportunity that we have here. So that is definitely a reflection that I see quite a bit.
That's beautiful. So this is my listener submitted question. Tammy from Perth, Western Australia, wants to know, do you think plants are aware that we're watching them?
I would think that the plants in our rooms might be aware that it is because of the care that we give them, so they understand that we're in tune with them and we're really looking at their needs and trying to meet their needs as much as we can. So potentially.
I think they are too on some level,
Yeah.
because they're very responsive to the environment and you're part of the environment.
Yeah.
Do you think people are born kind or taught kindness?
I actually think that's probably a little bit of column A and column B. I think, you can be born into that type of environment where there's a lot of kindness and stuff around, but then sometimes, it can be a learned thing over time where your environment around you teaches you to be a little bit kinder.
I like it. Is there a smell that instantly brings you back to yourself?
Anytime I walk into any of the cultivation rooms and I open up one of the flower room doors, that definitely is a familiar, enjoyable smell every time that I do it. And it doesn't lose impact either. It's pretty good. We did it today, so.
I want to say that's accurate because as you started to describe it, your face just lit back up again. I love it. Do you think you've already lived one of your best days?
No, I don't. I think my best days are yet to come because I think we live life in a constant evolution of improvement. So I think that I know myself internally that I have things that I could be better at and could improve on. So I hope that I can improve going forward and hopefully my better days are still to come.
I love that. Do you have an imaginary friend? And are they still around?
No, I probably got a number of personalities that rattle around in my head, which might double as an imaginary friend at time. So it's but no, I don't have it's definitely Gareth in there, but there's definitely different versions of Gareth at different times. So
I love it. I had an imaginary friend as a kid. But I think it was somewhat similar in the sense that we moved when I was very little. I left Australia when I was, how old was I? I was 6. And so, yeah, it was exciting to move to Texas, but I was also very kind of scared. And so I
lost all your friends.
Yeah, and I had an imaginary friend that I named Ghosty. Yeah, and Ghosty followed me around for a couple of years until I think I just adjusted into Texas life and I didn't need him anymore.
Right about Ghosty.
Yeah. Moment of silence for Ghosty. It's weird as it's sad. I think it's pretty normal to have an imaginary friend, right? I think they're just ways that,
Internal voice, I like to discuss them when I'm older. Imaginary friend when I was little, but internal voice as I get older.
I explain it to my teenager now. It's Jiminy Cricket sitting on your shoulder, right? Like it's just Jiminy Cricket kind of giving you guidance along the way to keep you out of trouble.
I like your Jiminy Cricket. It's better than my angel on one, devil on the other.
What's the first secret you remember keeping?
Oh, wow. I've been in the cannabis industry for a long time, so I'd probably say that my memory's not as sharp as what it used to be. Secret. Oh, I don't even really know. It probably would have been something to do with my sister or something or other as we were growing up with kids that, she wanted me to keep secret because she'd done something wrong. But yeah, I don't really remember exactly what that would be.
Mine was a St. Bernard puppy. My dad bought a St. Bernard puppy and he handed it to me. And he was like, you can't tell your mom.
I'm going to keep this one secret. It's got 4 legs and barks.
I was like 4.
Yeah.
I'm like, how do I, I clearly remember trying to pick it up to I don't know what I was trying to do, but I remember looking up at my dad being like, she's gonna know. Very last question. How many wrong turns before a road trip officially becomes a quest?
I don't think there'd be any wrong turns in that whole thing. It'd just be more of one big adventure.
Oh, so for you, it's like the second you get behind the wheel, you're like, I'm on a quest.
I'm on an adventure. There's no wrong turns. I just make the best of where I end up and then keep going from there.
I love it. Do you have any like strict rules when you go on a road trip?
I don't like to ask for directions because I think that's a generic male thing. We don't do that. But I mean, we do live in a land of, hey, Google. So I just ask Google and they take me where I need to go.
I like it. We have a strict rule of no backs.
Go back.
No backsies.
Can't go back.
No backsies. And the other rule is you're not allowed to eat somewhere that we have at home.
Okay.
Right? So like I didn't travel, blah, 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 so you could go eat Macca's.
Tim Hortons.
Exactly. Exactly. We didn't go all this way for you to get a double-double.
Yeah. You know they're delicious.
Oh, good old double-double. Gareth, that was a pleasure. So for the listeners who don't know anything about you, do you mind just giving us a brief introduction?
Sure. From a cannabis industry perspective, we wanted to move with the change of legislation back in 2016 when that happened. In a previous business before getting into Medcan, I was involved in event promotion and motorsport promotion. I ran an event regularly over in LA. I got to see the medicinal cannabis market over there prior to legalization. They had done a lot of work in that space for a long time. Legalization came into Colorado around the time I was working over there as well. And I got to see some of the industry start to develop there and talk to some of the guys because I'm a cannabis guy. So I was very much interested in how that was going to work. And they sort of gave me a lot of advice around making sure that you got into the industry early and, you know, don't have your eyes closed as to the other parts of the industry that will develop because it is a new industry. So, you know, don't just think you're only going to grow cannabis and that be the only thing that you do. Make sure that you've got a view across the whole spectrum of the space so that you can see any opportunities that come from that. So when legislation changed in 2016, Craig and I, my business partner and co-founder, we've been friends for a really long time. We wanted to be one of the first that applied to the Office of Drug Control, which we did. Not understanding the process and how that would take and what it would do and how long it would take to go through and the financial cost and all those other things that came along with it. But we were at the head of the pack, and I think we were about the third application that the Office of Drug Control received, and we were the 13th license that they issued out the other end. So prior to coming into cannabis, I have a background in marketing and advertising. So I worked for one of the national radio stations and I was one of their account managers there. I was involved in sports sponsorship, so working with the A-League and one of the clubs there and being the commercial manager. So I've got a bit of a commercial acumen around what I do. I like the numbers. I'm a sales guy and a marketer. And in any product that I've ever sold, I have to be passionate about it and I have to love it. Part of being a salesman is that people, yes, buy your product, but they also buy your energy and they buy you. So I've always had the philosophy of I need to be really passionate about what I sell because I need to be authentic and I'm a bit of an open book and people can read me pretty easily. So I need to be enthusiastic and believe in what I do. And this is definitely an industry where I feel that I've moved into that I'm also extremely passionate about, understand, and really want to see succeed and be an advocate for what we've created, and not only be an advocate for the industry, but be an educational piece for people who are in it and want to know more about it. And part of the reason why I want to talk to you today is that it's to try and educate and to let people understand more about our industry and break down some of those barriers and that. So before getting into the medicinal cannabis thing, I'm a sales and marketer by sort of trade, and that's what I do. Getting into medicinal cannabis, the industry that it is doesn't allow you to be one individual thing. We had to really get an understanding of the whole process. Back in 2017, the legislation was even set up that you could only cater for the Australian market and there was no import and there was no export. So the application you put to the Office of Drug Control could only consist in how you were going to do that business in Australia. We were lucky enough though that we got our license in 2017 November, but in February 2018, the legislation changed and they opened up import and export. So we were able to reevaluate what our business plans were at that point and then set the business up so that we could then have the ability to do like offtake agreements and start to produce more product and then look to export that product to other markets as they started to eventuate. And that set us down the path of creating the facility that we have here today. We then got this facility, which was essentially, it was Big Dad's Pies before we transformed it into what it was now. We got the facility, which is essentially just a big open concrete box, completely empty when we came in here. There was me and Craig, just two of us that stayed in this office the whole time trying to build this business. We both had other businesses. So for the first 3.5, 4 years of Medcan's existence, we were not a financial strain on the business. We were doing it for free. Our other businesses subsidized us trying to take this venture forward. And we were also private guys. So we were competing against companies that had shareholder funds. This was prior to the collapse of the capital markets in the cannabis space. So we were competing with companies that had a lot more resources, a lot more staff, a lot more things in that way. But we had a very clear direction of what we wanted to produce, how we wanted to do that. And we didn't let anything stop us from doing that. And that's enabled us to get to where we are now and produce the facility and the products that we have coming out of here now. So, again, from that, being cultivators, and there used to be 3 sets of licenses within the Office of Drug Control. So there was cultivation and production, there was manufacture, and then there was research. So we got all those licenses at the start because we wanted to do all of those processes. Now they've sort of amalgamated it into one, and it's one license to do different functions within there. But that was the legislation at the time, so we had to do those things. From sort of 2018 to maybe 2021, 22, we went through that pheno-hunting for genetics that were going to work within our facility while we got the funds together to build the facility that we needed. Our type of facility, the biggest difference between that and a greenhouse grow is capital expenditure. So it's very expensive to build a facility like ours, but it does give us all the benefits of having a facility like ours. So the environmental variability we don't have to worry about. We're in Southeast Queensland. Temperature's pretty volatile. Weather's pretty volatile. We can have 16 degrees in the day, 36 degrees by mid-afternoon, 100% humidity down to 40% humidity. And those things are really wild and really hard to try and, as a cultivator, try and manage. Whereas the type of facility we have, it really makes some of those things very standard. There's not much variation between those inputs. So we believed that this was the best way to produce the best cannabis in Australia. Medcan's aim is to be known as the best indoor cannabis cultivator in Australia, because from a brand perspective in the Australian market, there wasn't really a leader because it's a new industry. So everyone's fighting for that spot. And we believe that creating the facility that we have is going to give us the ability to produce that product out the other end and consistently do that. So variations don't happen with the crops that we put out because we can really monitor and standardize the inputs that are going in. So air, light, nutrients, all those things are all monitored, all tracked, and it all gives us the chance to produce the right type of product out the other end.
Take me through the process from clone to, I guess bagged and tagged in my tub, if you will, because you guys are fully integrated and it all happens here. So take me through the process.
I will sort of preface that by a case of I sit on the commercial side of the business. So my title's Chief Commercial Officer.
Yes.
So as much as I am extremely interested and motivated, I have a team of experts to take through that process. So if I do say something here that's slightly out of whack, that's why. But essentially, we went through a pheno-hunting process, and pheno-hunting is essentially looking for the type of genetics that you want to cultivate. And cannabis plants are pretty interesting in the fact that you might plant a seed and you grow a plant from that. To understand what that plant is, you can't take that plant all the way through to its finish, because then you won't be able to go back and go, right, I can replicate that plant because it's flowered and then it's died. So what we have to do is create the mother plant, and then we clone from that mother plant. So we have a genetic replica of what that mother plant is. And then we grow that plant through its cycle. So we take it through its flowering cycle, and then we test the results of what that flowering cycle is. And we compare that with previous results. So what we're trying to do is standardize the genetics that we have. So we're able to get the same result every time we grow with that genetic. And just from the timeline on how long it takes cannabis to grow, it would take us probably 12 to 18 months before we would get a good indication of whether the genetic we started with right back at the beginning is suitable for what we want to do and go forward commercially. So we do that process. So we find the genetics that we want. Once we get the genetics that we want and we believe that we can sort of commercialize or bring to life in a pharmaceutical product. And there's different things that we look at, which makes that determination on whether we think that that's a viable thing to do. But once we have done that, we have a mother plant. We take a cutting from that. We take that cutting and we try to standardize the cuttings that we have from the beginning of the process all the way through the flowering process. So we do get a really standardized product out the other end. So we take those cuttings, we cut those cuttings and put them in some cloning solution and put them in a little 1-inch rock wool cube. So we cultivate our plants, they're all grown in rock wool. And the reason we do that is because it's an inert media. It means that it's got nothing in there to start with. There's nothing that could affect our cultivation at all. And it gives us a really good base to start with, and we just add everything else. So we start off with a 1-inch cube. The plants start to go through their establishment, their cloning, their essentially gaining roots and becoming their own little plant to offer cutting. That process normally takes about 7 days. And what we see then is the root system start to develop on that cutting, and it starts to come through the bottom of the little cube that we have, the 1-inch cube. Those cubes are actually in trays with little domes. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to really have the microclimates that are around those cuttings the best that it can be to give those plants the most chance of rooting and being successful. And then, looking at the percentage of plants that we start with cuttings to how many we end up and they're rooted and they're going. We've got a really high success rate in our cuttings. So everything that we do in our cultivation rooms is so standardized, means that we really get a good result out the other end. And talking to the Canadian cultivators and the guys that do it over there, they were really blown away by the fact that we had such success with our cloning. Our plus 90% is something that I really wish that they could get to. And, taking one of our cultivators over there so they could see that and hear that from them was really, it was a chuff thing for us. It was like, good on us. We're doing the right things. We've got really good, facility cleanliness. We've got really good plant health. And we can see that just looking at the
I
others.
was going to say, if you're getting 90%, that's really little.
Yeah, it is really little. And again, I think that's just because we really standardized the process. So the guys are taking those cuttings and making sure they're the same height, making sure they have the same number of leaves on there, the same structure, the same look, so that we can start to make sure that the plants are working the way that we want them to all the way along. So once they sort of come out of their 1-inch cube, they're past their baby stages, we take that 1-inch cube and we put it into a 4-inch cube. And then again, that process starts to go along as the plant starts to become more mature. It goes through what they call its sort of teenage years as it's going through that vegetation state. It's really starting to grow quickly. It's starting to grow up as well as start to grow out. So we then start to manipulate that plant. So we do what's called topping of the plants. It starts to produce lateral growth. Then we're able to look at the number of branches that plant's producing so that we can look at the area that it grows in so that we make sure that the branches that we have are not fighting with each other or fighting with the plant next to them to get the area that we need them to grow in. So they spend about 3 weeks in that process going through the vegetative cycle, longer light period, a little bit warmer room, still replicating summer for the plants. And once we have those plants established and they're ready to go, and we have the room fully cleaned from the harvest before, we take those potentially 4-week-old plants and they go straight into our flower rooms and they start their process of flowering. That's where we obviously clip the lights back, temperature changes slightly, tricks plants into thinking, hey, we're going through into the new cycle, we're going to start to flower, and then that turns and then moves them down the flowering cycle. And depending on cultivar, it really depends on how long they need to be in flowering. So differences between genetics, well, some will have a longer flowering time, some will have a shorter time. And what we're trying to do there is get a balance for what works with our facility and works with our perpetual harvest cycle so that we're not holding up one room because of the other. So we're trying to be as in tune with that process as possible so that we don't have any clashes. So after it goes through the flowering cycle, we're really looking at different things along the way to understand where that plant is up to in its life cycle. We're now looking at testing the cannabinoid content in the last few days of the plant's life cycle to understand when is the optimal time for harvest. So there's a lot of visual things that you look at. You look at the trichomes to see if they're cloudy. You have an understanding with the look of the plant, but we need to be more scientific. We need to put more science behind that to know, right, with this cultivar at day 49, it is the most optimum it can be in cannabinoid content. And yield, and all these other things that matter to us. So we're trying to really establish those benchmarks and to see what works best and what is the best outcome for that specific cultivar. So once it goes through its cycle and it flowers and we're ready to harvest, we do a massive defoliation prior to harvesting, so we don't have as much of that fan leaf on the product. So, we start to remove chlorophyll from the drying process, so it doesn't change any of the flavors or the taste in there. We harvest those plants, we cut them and hang dry them. We have specifically designed drying rooms to maximize that process to make sure we get a really consistent outcome with our drying and our curing out the back of that process. So it'll do about 2 weeks in dry, again, depending on cultivar. Some take a little longer because they're more dense, bigger buds, bigger plants. Some don't take as much because, again, it's the opposite way. But once we do about 2 weeks in the dry, we have about 2 weeks in the cure process out the back of that as well. We are essentially homogenizing the bags and the bulk bags of the product that we have, trying to get a really good consistency across the batches that we have. The terpenes, the flavonoids really start to express themselves once some of the other volatile compounds start to burn off essentially in the curing and the drying process. And you really start to get the expressions coming out of what you want. And, in the room that we went in today, that they were doing the bulk bags and they were doing some of the curing, like the smell and the sweetness in that room is just like, I love it. It's probably a bit too much, but, that's why we do that. It really starts to bring out that process in the other way. And when you ask me what the important part is, that post-harvest part is genuinely really important to make sure that you don't mess up all the good growers' work with how you process it out the back and the other side. So once that's done, we bulk pack those products, and then depending on what the next stage in the process is, will dictate what happens with that. But let's say we were just going to put that into one of the lines that we have out there. We take that process out of bulk storage, we take it into pack and trim. We go through that process again with trimming any of the stuff that we don't want off the buds, if there's any little sugar leaves left, or if there's anything that the final trim before it goes into the jars, we sort of look for that process too. So we can make sure that what's going into the jars is exactly what we want, and it's checked by eyes, and it's checked by people who care about that part of the product. You have to understand what the expectation is out the other end to know what you're looking at to get that result. So, we train our staff that way. We do get people who are very much interested about the industry, so they have an understanding about expectations and what we have out the other end. And it just gives us that final check before we seal the lid and put the label on it to make sure that the patient's going to get exactly what they want. From there, bulk packed into bags, or bulk packed into boxes, bigger ship there's for the units, and it's sent out and wholesaled out to the product, to the pharmacies from there.
And happy days as our hands as patients.
Yeah. But again, for us, it's more because we're moving through the cycle. Let's just move on to the next thing too. We've got the next process that's got to happen. We've got another crop that's coming off. We have to keep the whole process moving all along. So,
have you ever had something that while it was growing, you were like, yeah, this is going to be great, awesome, can't wait, and then like the other side of the curing and drying, and then you were like, what happened here?
It's probably not necessarily the curing and drying stuff, because once we get to that point and we're doing it on more of a commercial batch or something that we think is going to be successful, we're already sort of past that stage. It's more in we do a lot of research, right? So we're looking for genetics all the time. And when you're growing plants, they look really good, bud structure's great, smell absolutely amazing, easy to grow, yield really big, and send it away and it comes back testing, it's like 12, 14%. You're like, we thought we were in a winner. It's just everything else was ticking the box. And again, for me as a cannabis consumer as well, I kind of know myself that the THC number is not the be all and the end all. And I've had some really great flowers that are down into the teens and felt really strong effects from those. But I'm also a commercial guy. So selling products that are underneath the 20% THC range for people, it's a harder process to do. So, as much as that, this was a pink kush strain actually that I'm talking about specifically, because it just, the bud structure, the way it looked, and everything was just so awesome. And then you send it away and you get the test results back and you're like, And then we grow it again and we do it a few times. We're thinking, well, maybe it was just that batch, or maybe it was just that strain, or maybe we can do other things and try and improve it. But if the metrics don't work from a cannabinoid content, you got to go, it's not going to be successful for us and have to be okay with it. But yeah, we've done that a lot of times.
Like it's tough for sure because a lot of people do rely on THC to make their decisions, right? And it is tough. And like for me right now, I have this huge gap in my morning. I've got nothing in my morning. Nothing. And part of the reason is I'm looking for something under 20 and there isn't anything.
Yeah. I kind of think, and how I sort of justified it to myself, was that when people are trying to look for a benchmark to compare price to product, what they're doing is they're breaking it down to its basic form of active pharmaceutical ingredients. So if you've got a 10 gram jar of 20%er, you know you've got 2,000 milligrams of active. Whereas if someone says it's a 30%er and you've got the same amount of grams, then you're essentially getting 3,000 milligrams of active. And in a medical sense, and when you're talking to doctors, like that's what they would look at to try and see a benefit or a, from a price perspective. So unfortunately, that is the way that the market is. I don't have a solution on how I fix that. It's more, I think that the education of the patients will start to develop more so that they will look at other things other than the THC number as to why they're choosing products. And I hope that that starts to develop more as the education of the whole industry starts to improve.
I do think we'll get there, but you're right. It's a lot of education. It's a lot of, again, stepping away from the THC. Like, yes, it's important. Yes, it is one of the active ingredients, but it's not the be all end all, right? And it is hard. It's education, but where do you start with that education?
And again, we've been trying to give that education since the beginning. Our position on that and our take on it was that there are so many other cannabinoids in there. There's other things that are happening here. The on-rage effect is a really big part of cannabis medication. And again, it's such an individualized medication that, what affects me in one way will affect you potentially differently, right? So again, then trying to convince people or educate people around that can be kind of hard because it's not a line in the sand. This is how it is. This is how it isn't, because it is kind of variable. So I'm hoping that the science and the research starts to catch up. We start to get more and more validated data around some of those things that can point us in the right direction. And it's just a timing thing.
It is a timing thing. Do you guys kind of keep notes on things like that, like in your research?
Everything. Yeah. We keep really, really detailed notes and really detailed results because it means so much to us. And there's not a reference I can go to get that information because our facility is unique, and it's unique to not only where we are, but also how we do things. So all the data that we get is really specific to what we are, which is why it's important. But we have, for everything that we have, cracked seeds on here, popped seeds, developed plants through, we have everything about that. Even, to a point of, there's a lot of R&D that goes into what we do. So then there's the R&D tax benefit that can come along with that. And that, you have to have proper stepped out studies to go, why are you doing the research that you're doing? And we don't have a roadmap for cannabis genetics or indoor cultivation for cannabis in Australia. So part of what we're doing is research. And then part of that is keeping the data and evaluating the data and then understanding what that data gives you out the other end. But that 100% that's a big part of what we do. We have to, and it has to move from that bro science that we talked about before into actual science, actual data that supports your theory. It supports your anecdotal information that you might have, but it's backed up with actual numbers that you can go, okay, we've got the data that proves the assumption that we're making. And that we're a new industry, it hasn't been 10 years old yet. So us thinking that we can put the cart before the horse is probably a little bit naive. We have to be okay with this is going to come over time, and we do the best that we can until we get there. And we help getting us to that point, because if the leaders in the industry like us aren't doing that, who is? So, it's a responsibility for us as one of the the people in the space and the companies in the space to do that research, to try and push it forward and to make it more science-based than pro-science.
It's a fine line. I do think a lot of patients don't realize that, like you're saying, it takes 12 to 18 months when you're doing a pheno hunt to bring it to where you think it's going to be. Or again, things look beautiful and they're ticking along, and you're like, oh, beautiful. But then you send it off and you're like, oh man, that's aesthetically it ticked the boxes, but like on paper, it doesn't.
Yeah. And again, when we were downstairs and we were looking in our rooms and I was showing you all the genetics that we have, and there's only a few that we've commercialized, but we've kept the other genetics because we don't know what home that they're going to have yet. You know, we've got some good stuff there that is high in other cannabinoids, but because the commercial demand for those things aren't matching, there's no desire for some of those things there yet. We don't want to totally discard them. We need to keep them available so that when the research starts to catch up, we might have something there that's going to have a really good therapeutic benefit out the other end that we didn't know about at the time, but we don't want to get rid of. And again, that's why we have so many stacks of different mother plants and different genetics in there, because we just don't want to destroy anything without knowing that it could have a home later on.
Which is exciting.
It is.
And challenging all at the same time, right? It is. Because you're right. I do feel like there's endless possibilities. And you're right. We don't know exactly what we can do with it yet because we do need the science for it.
Yeah, we do. Yeah. And again, that's an important part of what Medcan does. We've worked with the Western Australian University to look at doing trials, and, you know, we supported them with providing them product for trials that they were doing to prescription medicine resistant schizophrenic patients and high dose CBD. So we were working with them to do that. We're also now working with them to do what's more of a longitudinal study about the results people are getting from taking cannabis medications and combinations of cannabis medications to see how they're working out the back, because we are now gathering a large body of anecdotal evidence because clinics are taking data. They're seeing patients coming in going, right, this is what my pain scores were. Now this is what my pain scores are. What's happened across that period of time? We're starting to build up that body of evidence that's really going to support companies like ours really honing in, trying to find specific solutions. So, you know, like we've got products in our portfolio that are really good for helping with sleep. So the more that we can start to build up data around these products and the things that make up that product are having a really good therapeutic benefit in the sleep category, we can start to then explore why that's happening. What's inside that plant and that specific cannabis strain that's getting that therapeutic outcome out the other end. And, you know, there's obviously been a massive gap because we haven't had research on it for 100 years, but, you know, that's going to start to catch up and hopefully bring the industry forward.
I always say that was one of my favorite things about legalization in Canada, is that once it was federally legal, you could do more research on it. It was more accessible. It was acceptable to do the research. And I mean, Canada's still lacking in the research, right? Their medicinal market was going for several years, but it just disappeared once they moved into adult rec, which was very disappointing that's what happened. So it's, you know, hats off to Medcan that you guys are here in Australia and you're creating the book of data, because we don't have it and somebody has to do it.
Yeah. The Canadian part too, though, the way that the medical market in Canada was prior to legalization was that it differs to what it is in Australia, because here the doctor writes a prescription for the actual medication, whereas in Canada it was more the patient went and got access from the government to go, okay, I can be a cannabis patient. So then they could go and select and choose the cannabis that they will want to go to the manufacturer and get that product themselves. Whereas Australia took a different approach of where the GP is actually writing a specific medication. And you touched on the substitution part earlier in a conversation that we have. And again, the way the legislation's written, you know, that's, I suppose, some of the differences between the Canadian medical market and what the Australian medical market worked out to be. So, you know, I see some benefits and some negatives with both. I think now looking at the Canadian model from a rec perspective and seeing that firsthand and being over there, it's it's a kind of different recreational model. The government's still very much involved. They're involved in the wholesaling of the cannabis over there, and it does seem very complicated.
I gotta be very honest here. Uh, mm, I was very lucky living in Vancouver. I joke about it in some of my earlier reviews that I used to go to the guy because you had to know a guy who knew a guy who knew a guy. So I just called the guy. I mean, that wasn't his name, but he was Boutique Bud before I knew what Boutique Bud was. And so I had a phenomenal green market hookup, like again, like I said earlier when we were walking around the facility, I don't know if I would have started going to the dispensaries to buy or if I would have stayed happy in my green market, to be very honest with you, just because of where I was. Vancouver had a very robust green market.
Yeah, and even before legalization came in, I was over there prior to that time. But the openness and the accessibility I had to get access to cannabis prior to that time, I asked the guys in like cannabis culture and stuff, I'm like, what do you think's going to change with legalization? Because people were openly selling cannabis. There was no needing to get a script. There was none of that stuff. There was bars where you could go in and to have your dab rig and sit down and enjoy your cannabis is open. And to me, it was kind of confusing because I come from Australia where we've got such a strict view on it. Whereas in Canada, it was not legal yet in a recreational sense, but everywhere. Like even in BC, you go down the main street and there's guys with like little pop-up tents and tables set out that they're just, and this was before legalization.
There used to be a place. It was either Blunt Brothers or the Amsterdam Cafe. I can't remember which one, but they were in downtown. They were kind of like on the edge of Gastown. It was a little shady. Anyways, they were right by each other. One of them burnt down. And this is late 90s, early 2000s. You could go in there. And so before 5 o'clock, you could sit at the table and roll your joint, but you have to walk into the back smoke room, which is literally just a glassed area, right? And you could walk back there and you could smoke. But after 5 o'clock, you could sit at your table and roll and smoke. And it was like the weirdest thing. It was the cafe. Like you could just go in and I remember the first time a friend took me and like being paranoid, waiting. I'm like, oh my God, are the cops just gonna what was it? Bad boys, bad.
Yeah, well, they're like busting in the door.
Oh, they're gonna kick in the door. And I'm like,
my paranoia is big enough as it is.
I'm throwing the weed behind me. I'm like looking for the exit. I'm like, how am I gonna get out of here? What's happening? And like even the guy that was like, it was like a little cafe. The guy behind the register was like,
so nonchalant about it.
He was like, girl, they not like, don't even worry about it. Like the cops, it's like an understanding. They don't, whatever. But upstairs, you used to be able to like, you could, I can't even believe I'm admitting this. You used to be able to go in, and if you showed up empty-handed, you could walk upstairs and buy like nickel and dime bags from the Hells Angels. It was wild to me that this is like, again, late 90s, early 2000s. Totally acceptable.
Yeah.
Totally acceptable.
So, even going into the dispensaries now over there, it was just sort of like some dispensaries you get to see the product and you can have a look at it. Others, they don't. They've got it all behind cabinets. You can't really see the product. And between different like provinces, there's different rules. And it was still pretty hard to try and follow. I know from the counterparts like I do business with over there as well, like they look that and they love selling internationally because it's so much easier. They don't have to go through all the regulations that they do in Canada and all that sort of rigmarole to sell the product to the provinces there, but it just seems easier over here. And even in Canada, looking at the prices in the dispensaries to the people, like it's pretty expensive. Like when I look at what the patients pay per gram here in Australia, like we're pretty lucky because Canada doesn't have any competition. So in all the dispensaries there, it's only coming from within Canada. Same in North America and same in America. So everything there is all produced locally. So they don't have the same as what we do, where we've got all this Canadian product coming in, Colombian product coming in, South African product coming in, product coming from everywhere into Australia. So it makes the market really competitive, which then drives the price down for the end consumer, which I think is a good thing too. But buying in dispensaries in Canada and in LA, I was blown away by how much the price of cannabis was. It was just astronomical.
Yeah, talking to some of my friends in Canada, I'm like, you're paying what? How much a gram? I'm like, oh man, I can get 10 grams now for $60 here.
Yeah. Well, I think I paid like for 3.5 grams in Canada, like this is only a couple of weeks ago. I think I paid like $38 Canadian. And that wasn't like they could have given me stuff that was more expensive that was claimed to be better. But I'm like, oh, I'm pretty comfortable with that because that's still pretty expensive for cannabis over here. And in America, it was like, I was blown away by there. I think I paid 50 American, which is even more in Australian for like 3.5 grams of product where I'm like, and I think we have equally good products back home. So yeah, it's always good to go and see those industries and to see those other markets just to see how they.
It does make you wonder though, where the global market's going to go, because there's no denying cannabis is a global product. It's wanted everywhere. And eventually, I believe, more and more countries will legalize. It's just the way it's going to go. And so for me, I wonder, what is that going to look like in the world? What is like the average price of good weed going to be? Like, where are we going to level out because at some point we have to come to an agreement.
It always comes down to economics. You know, we've got product coming out of Thailand and stuff like that is so cheap. And that's strictly because they don't have the same costs as what.
Yeah, but some of that product is not cheap for me as a patient to buy.
Yeah, but when your cost of goods to produce the product is so low to start with, because you're not having to pay these crazy wages and stuff like that. Or it's not even that. It's more that they go the other way. The wages over there are so little that it makes them cost of goods to be pretty low. So, you know, for an Australian cultivator, that's what we look at and think, you know, we've got to be competitive, and we look at efficiencies. We look at things that we can do to try and bring our cost of goods down as much as we can so we can be competitive against those other products that are coming from different parts of the world. And, you know, we believe too that Australia should have leaders in the space that are growing really great product all the time that Australians can get behind and be proud to support, because the product that they get is of equal or better quality than the stuff that we're importing. So, you know, I can't just put up the flag and expect other people to stop imports. I need to compete myself. I need to give people a reason to support Australian product, because the reality is that as far as the tick boxes of things that a patient or customer needs to tick off, unfortunately, country of origin isn't rating highly on that list. There's other things that mean a lot more before you get to where that product comes from, because if you can get great product at a great affordable price and it doesn't come from Australia, unfortunately, the reality is that people are going to try and go down that path because they need to be able to go, right, the quality's there, the price is there, and it's Australian, which means that I'm going to do that. If the quality's not there and it's too expensive, then irrelevant of whether it's Australia, it doesn't matter. So I think that's the reality for us, and we live in the real world, and that's what we have to be. And, you know, I could complain about politicians not allowing us to import into Canada or send product into America, and we shouldn't do that if they won't take product back. We shouldn't do that there. But the reality is it's the patients that we need to look after. And the reason that we imported product was because there wasn't the standard of product that people expected in the Australian market. And we as Medcan have to do things to change that, to move that needle, for people to go, oh no, I can get Australian product that's cultivated indoors, that is of equal quality of the stuff that's being imported. And when given the choice of supporting an international company as opposed to a local one, if everything else is the same, I believe Australians will jump on board and support the Australian product.
Oh, absolutely. All things considered the same, I'd pick Aussie grown every time.
Yeah.
So every time.
We have to fly that flag. We have to tell people that. We have to be proud of what we do and, you know, get people like yourself in. And even doctors, like we're very big in inviting doctors to our facility so they can understand there's a massive gap in education around the doctors and even understanding the plant and how it works and how it's cultivated and the different ways of cultivating. And that's part of our mandate, is to educate those people too, open our doors to get people to come in to try and bring them up to speed with this medication and how it works and what we do to produce it. So
there's no doubt in my mind that Australia can absolutely produce phenomenal cannabis. And I think it's just a matter of time.
I think we are. I think there's definitely companies around that are producing really good cannabis out there. It's just that there's a lot of good product that's coming in from overseas as well. And, the price to cultivate cannabis in Australia is definitely different than it is in some of the cheaper, more
Well, if nothing else,
developed countries
I
around.
was just say, if nothing else, labor costs. I mean, labor costs at the end of the day has got to be one of your biggest costs overall here.
I don't make excuses to that. I believe that Australian cultivators should do their own thing and should sell on their own merits and should be equally as competitive as anything else from anywhere else.
Medcan got any big projects coming on this next year?
Um,
Well, I think Medcan is a big project. That's how I sort of see it. Yeah, it's already a massive big project.
we're always in the evolution of cultivation and genetics. Like genetics is going to be the way that this future goes. Understanding your genetics and better understanding what the genetics do is something that is a constant evolution for Medcan. So we've always got new cultivars coming through. We've always got evaluations as to whether they work for us and whether they meet the market needs and whether they have a therapeutic benefit that's not being met in the market at the moment. We have always been about sustainable scale up. So again, we didn't want to build this massive place in the hope that we can fill it. We have to scale up as the size of the market grows and as the need for Medcan product grows, we will be able to increase more rooms and put that on. The facility that we are in at the moment was something that in hindsight you learn from. Going forward, as we start and continue to grow this business, we will probably outgrow the facility that we're in at the moment, and pardon the pun. But going forward, we would probably like to then build something with the knowledge that we have now. Space is a big thing, where you store stuff, water storage, type of things that you learn and you think, okay, this would be better going forward. And if we had our time again, this is what we do. So again, we always have expansion and scalability in our business at the front of mind. So we've got to look at how we're going to do that going forward. We're also looking at different techniques from the way we cultivate to the way even we remediate product out the other end. But we're also looking at bringing some of the best and the most up-to-date genetics from Canada over to Australia and having a pathway that can keep Medcan at the front of the latest genetics coming out all the time. Using technology out there now that wasn't really available to us maybe 5 years ago from a tissue culture perspective is going to let us really get to the forefront of the genetics and bring stuff over that we can bring to life much quicker than we can if we're trying to go from seed and propagate that way. Obviously, we are a vertically integrated business as well, so we have other things that we do along the supply pathway to help make that business, and all parts of those businesses are growing as well, and making sure that we manage the growth in those businesses. And we started with 2 people, me and Craig, sitting in this business, and that was only in 2017. We're now 2025, and we have 100 employees across 3 different businesses. And going from small business to big business is something that you have to adapt to as a manager and a leader. Again, we work very closely with developing our talent, developing our leaders here, do leadership training. We try to be as transparent across the business as we can to keep everyone on the same page, understand where the company's heading, why we do what we do, trying to really dig down into building the culture piece within our company as well. So, that's probably what we've sort of got going on. Yeah.
It's a lot of stuff going on.
Stuff, yeah.
Yeah.
Stuff.
It's constantly evolving.
Constantly evolving.
Is there anything, I guess, industry-wise that you're kind of made you excited or you're hearing whispers about?
From an industry perspective, I think the more local cultivators coming on, giving the local industry more credibility is going to be a good thing. The less reliant we need to be on importing product in here, I think, as a industry as a whole is something that we should really work towards. I think the skill set across the industry is starting to grow as well. Like when we first started, we had to bring talent to Australia because the talent wasn't here to do what we needed to do. Like having indoor cultivation facility experience is not something that you'd really find in Australia too much unless it's coming from maybe the green market. And where we did have a lot of people that applied from the green market to want to get into the industry, cultivating in a high-tech LED environment like ours is a really specific skill set. You can't really go, well, this is what I did in a greenhouse and I'm going to do that here in an indoor facility. It's different. So, we did our research and we brought talent from Canada, from a big indoor cultivator over there. We brought our mate to come over here and help us develop our facility so that we could produce the product out the other end. And that was a very important combination. So I think the talent pool in Australia is definitely growing all the time. More people are coming into the industry, which then brings talented people from other spaces in here, which can collaborate to try and take our industry forward. I think that's good. I think the overall acceptance of cannabis as a medication is really starting to, I think overall cannabis acceptance in the population is a very high percentage. They talk about 80% of people are fine with cannabis there being in a medical stage. So the doctor acceptance is starting to grow as well. So the number of authorized prescribers now that are taking that step of becoming authorized prescribers, I think it's up into the early 3000s now. So that's a lot of doctors that are coming across that are seeing the benefit of cannabis medication with their patients, which it starts to snowball the acceptance out there. The industry itself is doing more in the research department. There's a lot of my competitors that are doing different things out there with trials and working with different partnerships with universities, which again, I think is really good. We need more of that across the industry. It can't just be one company doing it. It needs to be everyone doing it. So I think that's really good. We've got an election coming up this weekend, and the Legalized Cannabis Party at the last federal election definitely got a pretty decent vote for the Senate. So I think that maybe this election too, it might definitely fly the flag of more acceptance. More people are prepared to put on a ballot paper that they support legalization of cannabis, which I kind of think is pretty good too.
I definitely think that the Legalized Cannabis Party is getting more, if nothing else, they're getting more candidate names on the ticket.
Yeah. And if you can, when you're going in there and you're choosing and you see that as a choice, then, people who are pro and advocates for the industry making that choice and putting a real tick in a box so that the politicians can actually see that there is a movement here that is worthwhile, because politicians are motivated by votes and money. It's just how that business works. And the last election, 7% of the vote in some of the states was going to the Legalized Cannabis Party, which is a needle mover. Like, they all pay attention to that. So, I think stigma's coming down, acceptance is going up, which is good. People talk about, do I think legalization will come in? And as much as I hope that would be the case, and I'm very much for it, I don't think Australia as a society is quite there. I think it's a little bit away. We're very conservative culture, and I think that the medical framework is a pretty good framework for it to operate in at the moment. There's a lot of oversight, so having medical people involved with doctors and pharmacists, there's a lot of checks and balances there to try and have a safety net in there for people. So yeah.
I'm with you. I do think the tides are slowly shifting, slowly changing. And it's all about having the conversation.
It's about proof too. When patients are going in, seeing a doctor that's prescribing the 5 different medications that they're not having success with it, and all of a sudden they're using one medication that has a benefit to many of the symptoms that they were trying to fix, that starts to change perception. And it is a slow-moving machine, but it definitely is starting to spread out. And
one of the things I say all the time is, maybe the science isn't there to say it's, this silver bullet that's going to cure everything. It's going to solve this and da. Okay, so maybe the science isn't there yet. Maybe it never technically gets there, but there's a reoccurring theme that the more people I talk to, the more I accept that cannabis brings back a quality of life that a person didn't have before. And there's no doubt in my mind.
Yeah. And I'm a patient too, right? So I suffer anxiety, which leads to insomnia, right? So my mind doesn't shut off. I get into a loop of thinking about something, and it's really hard for me to jump off that loop. It builds up that nervous feeling in my stomach where I feel nauseous, and that's the anxiety expressing itself. And, I did a lot of traveling, and I used sleeping tablets to help with the travel and the recovery from the jet lag and stuff. But going to the States all the time and doing that, I spoke to people there. They said, you should use cannabis to manage that problem. You won't have the hangover that appears when you take sleeping pills for the next couple of days coming along. And that really started to change my perception on that. And using medication now and able to manage my anxiety in a way that I am, that has far less side effects out the back, is just something that's so, it seems so normal to me now. It seems so normal that it's hard to imagine a time before that was my solution. But I was on pretty serious sleeping tablets and stuff, even back into the days of Mogadon and Stilnox and stuff, that they were the go-to for this condition. Oh, you got anxiety. Oh, you can't sleep. Here, just have any one of these 4 different tablets that is going to fix you. And again, I don't claim that they didn't work, because the sleeping tablets definitely put me to sleep. But for the next 2 days, I was a vague zombie and just couldn't handle that feeling all the time. And that was why finding cannabis to give me that solution was so much better.
I'm with you. As somebody who used to have migraines, it was unreal, the crazy pills I used to take, and they made me feel loopy and discombobulated. And like, I might have been present sitting here with you, having a conversation with you, but like in the back of my mind, I'm like fighting to be here. And like, I don't know, it just, yeah, there was that hangover. And my big thing was, my husband worked oil and gas. We had a kid. And I always had this fear that, well, what if my 3-year-old wakes me up in the middle of the night because he's puking his brains out and he needs mom and dad's not here, and I've taken my migraine meds and now I cannot function to help my 3-year-old who's puking. But you better believe that if I had smoked a joint and gone to bed and my kid woke me up at 3 a.m. and was like, Mom, I'm puking, I'm like, whoa, I'm up, kid. What do you need? I'm here. Let's go and take care of this. And so it's weird to break it down like that, but like, there was a part of me that hated taking my migraine medication, even though it kind of was preventing my migraines. But in the back of my mind, I'm like, but what happens if I need to do something while I'm medicated? And I can't. I just can't. And so, like I said, cannabis, it's improved the quality of my life, and there's no doubt in my mind about it.
Yeah. And I can even feel medicated, but if something is important, I'm able to get back to normality pretty quickly to try and deal with that, even though I may be relaxed or I may just be feeling that type of way. So yeah, I just think it's good that there's another option for people now. They're not, forced into just one type of solution. They have other options they can try to see if it works for them.
My hope is, as much as I would like to say that we're going to move into an adult recreational in 10 years, my hope is not that. My hope is that cannabis, when you're talking to your doctor, that cannabis is now a frontline medication. It's not because right now it's, I got to show you that I've done this for my migraines. I've done that for my endometriosis. I've done this, Here are all the tests. Here's my ultrasound. Here is It's my last option. So can I please try it over here? No, in 10 years, I want to be able to go to my doctor and my doctor say to me, have you thought about cannabis? I want that to be my first discussion, not my last discussion.
Especially too with kids who have seizures and stuff like that, Dravet's and epilepsy and stuff in kids, that they're giving them so much serious medication, anticonvulsant all these things that are really, really serious drugs that sometimes can maybe progress some of the negative things that they're seeing from that condition. And I have a friend whose child has Dravet's, and the progression from where she was after taking that medication, it was a real regression. She became an quality of life, and the family's quality of life really, really changed. And, having another option for them that they could try CBD as a better solution and not being a last resort, but maybe a first resort, might not have had the negative effects on the kid out the other side and the actual pharmaceutical medications that they use. So,
yeah, that's my hope. That's my dream. In 10 years, I want to go to my GP, and that's my first line, my first conversation of, oh, Christina, this is what's ailing you?
Yeah.
Have you thought about cannabis maybe?
Yeah. Well, that's where the research comes into it. So we have to play that part as well.
Absolutely. Gareth, it was a pleasure talking to you today.
It's all done.
I loved every minute of it.
Very much.
I like to end on a nugget of information or a call to action. So what would yours be?
Well, we've just released another Australian top line indoor cultivated cannabis variety, and We are proud of that because we've developed that genetic ourselves. We've called it Velvet Thunder. It's a sativa-leaning product, which sort of adds to our Australian grown portfolio because it's the first one of the sativa-leaning products that we've produced out. And we're very excited for that to be out there. So that's 4 Australian grown products that we've now produced out of our facility, and we've got consistently coming out of. And I mean, that's another little baby that we've produced out of here. So one of the kids I'm very happy about.
I love it. One of the kids we're setting free and setting them into the world.
And that's what it is, So yeah, so that's pretty exciting for us. And again, I get a buzz every time I come to the facility and get to see the plants because, yeah, it's quite inspirational and it's a proud moment for what we've developed here.
Like I said, Gareth, you can see it in your face, man. Like when we were talking about it in the rapid fire and you started talking about going into the room, your face genuinely does. It lights up when you start talking about it. So it makes me excited too.
Yeah. Well, this industry's been very hard. Like we've been involved since the start. And I think if you're not passionate about it, it makes it hard to get through the tough times and get out the other side. And I think that's what really has driven us to get to where we are now, that we do believe in what we're doing and we're passionate about it and we're proud of what we've created and want to keep doing it.
It shows.
And that's a wrap on my conversation with Gareth Ball from Medcan Australia. If you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to share it with a friend or leave a 5-star review. It really helps us spread the word about what's happening here in Australia's cannabis scene. And if you'd like to support the AusCanna podcast, you'll find the Buy Me a Coffee link in the show notes. Until we meet again, friends, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to listen. And remember, as Tim Duncan's mother used to say, good, better, best. Never let it rest until your good is better and your better is your best.